This is
It doesn't have to be
Kent Quinn, and this is May 8th, 2010. Informal interviews. So, yeah, I really loved your biography, and despite all the typos and some of the grammatical structure,
Yes,
but
that's right.
yeah, but it was very informative. What I really liked, and I'd like you to talk about, was when you were a child going to Europe for the first time. If you can describe the crossing and the the whole process of traveling in those days. I think it was 1948, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it's not much different. Yeah, we took my mother had to have an operation at the last moment, so we flew from Kansas City to New York in a TWA Constellation. And I was 12 years old, and we stopped in St. Louis and in Pittsburgh, and then we got into New York City the day that Babe Ruth died. And my mother had to sort of stay in the hotel and recuperate, but we met some people on the plane that she knew who worked for TWA. So they took me on the subway and to the Statue of Liberty and Empire State Building for about 3 days. And then we got on the ship, the de Grasse, which was a French line, and it took us, it was very slow. It took us 13 days to Le Havre. But it was just a big celebration when you left, and the band played, and streamers were broken that people held. And it was a party on the boat. Wine, even for children, was provided free at the meals. And I remember we had horse racing with these sort of fake horses. But there's first class, second class, and third class on the ship. And I was in third class. And I was a really bad boy. I picked up, in third class, I picked up all the tickets for the 6 horses. And then I snuck into first class when they had the race again. So I was holding a ticket on all 6 horses, and I turned in one for the winner. And I only did it once because I didn't want to get caught by the guy. And they said that it was more fun. The parties were more fun in third class than they were in first class. And then we stopped first at Southampton, and people got off in England. And then we went to Le Havre, and the harbor was all blown up ships and blown up buildings. And then we took the boat train from Le Havre to Gare Saint-Lazare in Paris. And a lot of the buildings in Normandy had not been fixed, and there were German soldiers' rifles in the ground with their helmet on it where they were buried, and there was food rationing, and it was very exciting. I think 12 years old is a wonderful age to travel because everything is so exciting and new and open, and you're not jaded at all. You know, you just, so then we were in Paris for a couple of weeks, and then we went to Geneva, Switzerland, and stayed in a pension, and my mother was supposedly going to have a job for the Red Cross, but it didn't pan out. So you want me to keep going? Or?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
I don't want to interrupt you.
No, that's all right. I mean, yeah. I can follow through. Chronologically, it keeps going kind of side by side. Yeah. So then we moved to Vence, which is down in southern France, not very far from the Mediterranean, not very far from Nice. And we lived there for about 3 or 4 months. I remember somebody had just died in the bed that we moved in. I was a little bit scared of that. But there were wonderful painters that I didn't even know. You know, Chagall and other people were living in Vence and painting at the time.
They were actually living there.
They were living and painting then. They were alive. You know, all those people. A lot of these people were. Yeah. And I got a bicycle, and I used to bike downhill to Nice and wander around. And then I would go to Cagnes-sur-Mer and put my bike on the bus to go way back up the hill. And we also went to a lovely little town called Saint-Paul-de-Vence, which now has become very touristy. Mm-hmm. And there had been a bridge, and only thing left was the centerpiece with a little piece of road, but it had been bombed out, but it's completely gone now. But we used to go there for lunch. And then we moved down to a little town called Croix de Cagnes, which you had to take a little kind of a dirt road to get to, and it was a fishing village. Now it's a huge freeway going to the Nice airport, and it's all been built up, hundreds of apartment buildings. It's been very spoiled. The wonderful thing about 1948, Europe was just like before the war. Nobody had cars. Everybody just had bicycles. But we met two women. We met two women on the boat, one of whom was married to the publisher of Life magazine, who were lesbians, but we were completely, had no idea what a lesbian was at all. We were really naive. And they bought a little Fiat, a little two-person Fiat, which was very hard to buy a car in those days because they had to like be before the war. You know, they weren't producing new cars yet. And my mother and I would sort of sit in the baggage compartment back in the back, and they took us around. And we never did really quite figure out what gay meant or whether they were lesbians, but they were very good friends. And I lived in this village, but I think, as I told you before, I started going to school, but some kid hit me really hard, almost knocked me out without my even seeing it. And I was later told that his parents had been killed by American bombing. Both his mother and his father had been. And so I stopped going to school, and I just stayed at home and read the Saturday Evening Post. And
Really?
the priest came up to, one time when I was sick, the priest, or I guess when I stopped going to school, the priest came to see why I wasn't going to school. But I remember I used to go on my bike downtown and get a dozen oysters, and they would open them for me, and I'd bring them back on a tray, sort of biking on my bike back to home. And we lived in a beautiful little house right across the street from the Mediterranean. And people, there were some of my friends were kids, their parents were fishermen, and they had these logs they would roll the boats out with. And I don't think I ever got to go out with them, but I got to go and eat at their houses and have this wonderful French food with barrels of fish and all this sort of stuff, wonderful sandwiches. And so we were there almost a year. Can I show you, what's the next question?
Let's see. Well, Paris, in 1948.
Okay, yeah, all right.
How many years there?
We were in Europe for 2 years.
And you moved to Paris?
We moved to Paris after about a year.
Okay.
After about a year in Royan. I'll never forget, my mother, for some reason, negotiated with a bus company, and this bus came right up to our house from Nice and stopped in front of our house, and we put all our baggage on it. And it was a 2-day trip to Paris because there were none of the auto routes were in then. And we obviously went up the same road where our farmhouse is now. We went up the Route Napoleon.
Really?
Yeah, which is, and because we spent the night in a hotel in Aix-les-Bains. And Aix-les-Bains is not far from Grenoble, where our farmhouse is. And it was a 2-day trip. And I remember we were sitting kind of like up in the front seat of the bus. But I mean, 2-day trip, it's 4 hours on the TGV now, you know, from Nice to Paris. But we really saw the countryside.
So describe to me who, like the passengers, what were they like?
I can't remember. Really? I really can't remember the other passengers. I remember we stayed at the hotel that was concluded in the bus trip, and we had a lovely dinner in the hotel and breakfast the next morning, you know, and then got on and the bus, and it was a delightful trip. But then we moved to a little hotel on Rue Washington, which was off the Champs-Élysées, not far from the old TWA headquarters. And then my mother got a job through an ad in the International Herald Tribune. She got a wonderful job as a social secretary for a multi-millionaire American who owned the newspapers in Philadelphia, or a newspaper in Philadelphia. And he had a racehorse stables in Normandy, and then he also had a house up in Deauville. And I remember we went up one weekend to work, and she went up to work in Deauville, and I got to go. And it was just like Sabrina, the movie Sabrina, where we all stayed in apartments over the garage, which had about 14 cars. And we walked one night to go into a cafe, and the chauffeur got the Rolls Royce, and we walked 2 blocks. Then he picked us all up, took us to the cafe. Then 2 blocks before we got home, we all got out again, so the owner wouldn't know that he'd picked us up. But that was very exciting. And I had a bike in Paris, and I wandered all over Paris. I didn't go to school. I was looking for for movies in English.
And how long were you out of school? Were you not going to
I was
school?
2 years.
And did your mom have any concern that you weren't getting?
Yeah, I suppose so. I wish she had made me go back to school. I wish she had made me get over my fear of going to school. I think I told you before that when we left, my aunt and uncle had to bail us out and give us some money. We were always running out of money. We ran up a big bill at the hotel and a big bill at the restaurant. And they called up on this little phone at the hotel, and they were going to kick us out.
Right.
And my mother sent me down to talk to them and said, the money's coming from America, the money's coming from America. And
I'm going to stop you 1 minute.
Okay.
There's something technical that's bugging me.
All right.
I'm getting reflection off your glasses. And
I could take them off.
no,
We were in Paris.
you were there for
I was in Paris for, I don't know, 9, 10, 12 months or something.
Right.
And then we got bailed out. They sent us some money for the ticket to pay off our debts. And we got...
And who sent you the money?
My aunt and uncle.
Okay.
My mother's sister married a wealthy guy who owned a construction company in Kansas City. And he, a really interesting guy. And they bailed us out. And they bailed us out when we were in Europe. We would have never made it. They were sort of our lifeline. And we went home on the same ship we went over on the de Grasse. And then we moved, we stayed in Kansas City for a month or two, and then we moved to Sausalito. We had been living in California before, in Los Altos during the war. And Sausalito was great because it was right across the Golden Gate Bridge, and I got a bicycle and I went down and talked to people in the marina about working on their sailboat and sailing for getting to sail.
Mm-hmm. And how did you learn sailing?
I learned sailing by just that. I went down to this to a guy who had maybe a 34-foot boat or something, a 30-foot boat, and asked if I could work for him on the boat. And he said, well, I could be a babysitter, because he had a small child, and that we would sail on Saturday, and then Saturday night we'd go to the Corinthian Yacht Club in Belvedere, and the child and I would go in the back and have dinner early, and then they would have dinner at the yacht club with their friends, and then depending on how much you had to drink, we would sail or motor back about 2 o'clock in the morning to Sausalito. But the kid, they would have given me breakfast money, and the kid and I would go up through the hatch in the front, and I would take him to a restaurant, and they'd get up about 10 or 11. I'd keep the kid quiet until then. Then we'd go sailing again, just around Angel Island and go swimming.
Right.
But the way I learned to sail, you never learn to sail unless you're the skipper. The way I learned to sail is because they had an El Toro, and they let me use their little El Toro, the little pram. And I sailed around the Sausalito Marina and a little bit with that. Then I bought a boat for $10. And then I talked 2 or 3 of my friends into getting boats. And we were able to pull them up on a sandy beach in Sausalito for free and just leave them there. And we worked on them. And then when we would come home from school, if there was a lot of wind on the bus, we could see if there was a lot of wind, we said, well, let's go sailing. And we'd always get in trouble. Sometimes our sail blew out or we flipped the boat over because we'd wait till there was really a lot of wind. And they just had centerboards. They weren't keel boats. And also the Nunes brothers, there where Sally Sanford's Valhalla restaurant, she used to be a madam in San Francisco, and she was really infamous, and she had this wonderful restaurant. And right by the restaurant was the Nunes brothers boatyard, which is all gone now. And people would be there, they'd haul their boat out, and they'd be cleaning off the bottoms and getting ready to paint them. And I would go and ask them if I could work for them in exchange for going sailing. And they said, yeah, and they would take me out to the Farallon Islands, and we'd sail around, and I would meet people.
How were the Farallons? Did you see any sharks?
No, like they're talking about all the sharks there now, yeah. No. And then one of my friends in high school's father was a bar pilot, and I always thought I wanted to be I wanted to grow up and go in the merchant marine and be a bar pilot.
What's a bar pilot? A
bar pilot is a guy who goes out and sits on the pilot ship, and then when a ship comes in, he brings the ship from the Farallon Islands, from about 10, 15 miles out, into the dock. He brings them all the way through the harbor. They have to have a guy do that, and that way you can live at home and just do that. It's kind of a good ending of a career of a captain in the merchant marine. And I remember one day he took us out fishing to the Farallon Islands with all our friends, and they all got seasick right away except me. So I was real skinny and hungry, and I ate all their lunches. And then on the way back, I got sick, and they all laughed, because I had been giving them a hard time, but I overate. That's why I ate. And Then my mother met a guy who was a sergeant in the Army stationed at Fort Baker right under Golden Gate Bridge, which is now all sort of a park and hotels and stuff, real fancy. It's not a military base anymore. And
It's on the Sausalito side?
yeah, on the Sausalito side, right underneath the bridge,
Okay.
right underneath the bridge is Fort Baker. It's a beautiful little area. Oh, which reminds me of another story that I think maybe I told you before, that when I was in junior high, some of us climbed over a fence and we got onto the tower of the Golden Gate Bridge that just had metal rungs coming out and about 200 feet up, and we decided we would climb it. And I got up about 30 feet and got scared, but the guys below me wouldn't let me down. Yeah. So we had to go all the way up just on these metal rungs, and we got onto a painter's rack and then climbed onto the sidewalk of the Golden Gate Bridge and walked back, you know. But we climbed.
Where did you start climbing?
We started in Fort Baker because if the pylon is not in the ocean, it's on the land.
The Sausalito, right.
It's on the land, and there was a fence, but they didn't have real bad barbed wire on top.
No,
so we climbed the fence, and then we got over, and they were just, as I say, metal rungs, and it was all the way up to the road.
Oh, jeez.
And we used to also.
How many feet is that?
200.
200 feet.
Yeah, I'm just sitting there 200 feet, scared to death, But these guys, I knew there were 7 or 8 of us, how you dare each other and nobody, and the other ones will not let me down. And we also used to have BB gun wars, wearing sunglasses and think that we were okay, until one day on the way home we shot the sunglasses, and they all shattered. And we realized, but we were shooting right at each other with BB guns.
No one lost an eye, though.
No, nobody lost an eye. So what's the next question?
Well, this is. I still want to go back to this bridge adventure. If you can recall it, it's pretty remarkable.
It was remarkable, yeah. But I also, what was remarkable was having a bicycle and biking across the Golden Gate Bridge, and then biking through San Francisco and going to San Francisco Seals games. And in those days, we had the Greyhound bus, 25 cents to get in the city and get back. Yes. I mean, and then we would climb in the hills up. I had a dog, an Irish setter, and I used to take a BB gun, and I remember feeling guilty shooting some little birds with a BB gun. But we climbed like over toward Fort Concrete. We climbed up above the freeway, and then all the way over, all through the hills there above, And one time we were on a sailboat, and another guy and I, my closest friend and I, and the sail blew out, and we started filling with water, and we got over to a big buoy and tied up, but the boat, and all these other boats came by and they were taking pictures, and we were waving, no, we want help, but they wouldn't help us. Finally a boat came, and he tried to tow our boat, but it flipped over, and they couldn't do it, so we just left it. We went home, we got clean clothes, we went back to find somebody to go get the boat, and the Coast Guard was there, and they were flipped out because they found this boat with nobody in it, and they thought somebody drowned, and they said we're never supposed to leave a boat like that, they chewed us out, and all that. But they had recovered the boat for us. But I mean, it was an ideal place for a kid to grow up. And I went to Tamalpais High School, and which is over in Mill Valley. And we would get a bus in the morning. We had to hitchhike home from swimming practice because there was no bus after swimming practice. And it was that high school was completely lower class, which was from Marin City, middle class, which was from Sausalito and Mill Valley, and upper class, which was from Belvedere and Tiburon. And on the swim team, there were loads of kids from Belvedere and Tiburon who got brand new cars when they turned 16, and who had junior memberships in that Corinthian Yacht Club. And but it was Los Altos was a wonderful place during the war. Orchards, we had rented a little house with orchards on 3 sides. Now it's all houses, all filled in. Sausalito was bumper to bumper traffic on the weekend when I tried to take Betsy back up to show her. Well, she's seen it many times. And now it's all boutiques instead of the real library, instead of the real stores that were there when I was there. It was a great place to grow up.
Back to Paris. You rode your bike there.
Oh, you want a story about when I sold the bike?
Well, I like that story, but I just want to know how it was different, traffic, riding through Paris as opposed
Okay,
to now.
there were far fewer cars than now, but what I remember more clearly than riding my bike, maybe I only got my bike the last couple of months I was there, but what I remember more clearly is the wonderful buses, the old buses, that the back end of it was where you stood, and it was just a little wall this big, but you could stand out there and see everything, and then the guy, when everybody was on board, a guy would pull the chain and tell the driver to take off, and it was today it's all these electric buses and you're kind of confined inside, and everybody was running and getting on at the last moment, even when the bus was pulling out, and there was far more charm in the old buses than there is today, And I remember the buses going through the building. They would have an archway through the building in the Louvre, and the road would go right through. I'd never been on a road that went right through buildings before. And I just wandered all around, but on my own. I can't remember. I can remember more recently bike rides. I got up this is not many years ago. We were staying at a friend's apartment for free, and she had 2 bikes. And I woke up at 4:30 in the morning the day we were leaving. So I got on my bike and I biked all the way across Paris. And all the parties were still ending from the nighttime parties. And I went up the Champs-Élysées and the cafes were open from the night before.
Right.
And then I biked back and we flew home that day. So, and then Greg and his wife and Betsy and I rented bikes. And I was really impressed with Betsy because the bike shop was about 3 miles from the Seine, but on Sundays the road is closed for only bicycles. And I remember we were biking along, and we were in this tunnel, and all of a sudden, Greg said, "Oh my God, this is where Princess Diana got it." We were right in the middle of the tunnel by ourselves. Wow. It was just kind of eerie. Yeah. And then we biked back along the Seine, and then we had to do the 3 miles back to the bike shop through traffic, right out with all the cars. Right. But in the old days, biking in Paris, as I say, was less difficult because there were fewer cars. But one of the problems with driving, I don't know if you've ever driven in Paris, one of the problems is that they don't paint the lanes. So you're never quite sure. People, you'd be, all of a sudden 2 cars would be closing in on you. Right. Right. And of course the worst of all in Paris to drive is around what they call l'Étoile, the star, and then they call it Champs-Élysées, they call it l'Arc de Triomphe, and we call it the Arch of Triumph. But there's 12 big boulevards coming in, and you try to drive around it, and you always see people aiming at you all the time. And I would just wait and get a bus and use it sort of for cover to get over to where I wanted to go. But that's a real hairy place to drive. Yeah.
Any great culinary experiences in 1948 in Paris?
Oh yes, I think after we left Rue Washington, we moved over to the left, which is on the right bank. We moved over to the left bank, right by Montparnasse and Raspail. And this little restaurant that we ran up a huge bill at, we went to it every night. And the hors d'oeuvres were unbelievable. I mean,
so you had an account there or something?
Yeah, we had an account there, and which you couldn't do.
Bailed out.
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, and then we ran into the old problem that poor people run into. They would send us a certain amount of money, but it wasn't enough to pay off the bill. So we'd have to go to another restaurant, and eat there for a while until we got more money to pay off the bill and feel guilty.
But the owners would let you do that.
Yeah, they would no more let us do that now. Right. George Orwell, I don't know, it's just the old days. It was the old days, the way they were used to it. And we were we were about half a block from the Montparnasse and Raspail, and the Café Dôme, all these famous places from where Hemingway and all the people, I mean, it hadn't changed at all since the 20s and the 30s, because Paris was, and everything was, just like before the war. It didn't have the big influx of people and the baby boomers and all that. It was
saved from bombing too.
Yes, it was safe from bombing, that's right. So like Prague.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, like I read Is Paris Burning? Maybe you have too.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think I saw the movie here.
Hitler told the guy to burn it all down, and the German general refused to do it.
Right.
Oh, and which of course reminds me that we heard lots of stories about the war, I remember we were invited one day to this French lady's house. I don't know how my mother knew it. And we had blood pudding. I couldn't eat it. Blood pudding is sort of a pig's blood that's been, made thick.
Right.
And but she said they used to drop homemade bottles with gasoline on German soldiers who were on the sidewalk, and then they'd run and hide.
Homemade bottles of what?
Of gasoline, to blow them up.
Molotov cocktails.
Yeah, Molotov cocktail. Yeah.
Really?
And we also, when we were down in southern France, we heard about the liberation when the Americans were coming. And this one woman had a Cross of Lorraine flag that she'd made, but you went put it out, and she put it out on her house because the liberation was coming. Mm-hmm. And she went to the market, and when she came back, there were 6 German soldiers there, upset about the flag. And she pretended like she was the maid instead of the owner, and that she knew nothing about it, and gave them something to eat, and they went away and left her alone. We also in southern France, when I was in southern France, when I was 12 or 13, the official rate of exchange was 300 francs to $1 in the bank. But on the black market, you get 550. And so there was this one store in Nice where I always went, and we got 550 francs to $1. And then right down from there, they rented motorbikes. And they rented me a motorbike that had the engine up over the front tire, and you would sort of pull it back and you pump a while, then you put it down, the engine would start. Mm-hmm. And I remember I got stuck in traffic, but I took that motorbike and I biked all the way to Monte Carlo and back, past Villefranche and all these beautiful places. And I couldn't believe that anybody would let me, a 12-year-old, rent a motorbike. Yeah. Later on, I returned to France with my stepfather and my mother, and went to an army high school, and I bought a motorbike, my own motorbike, with a motor down below, the 49cc. And we didn't make it to the Spanish border, we made it to Biarritz. Another guy and I did in high school from up above Bordeaux. We lived in Royan. That was fun.
What is your favorite city?
My favorite city?
It's a trick question.
Yeah, I don't really have a favorite city. My favorite cities are San Francisco and Paris.
Okay. And they're very much alike.
Yeah.
They have that feel.
Both... I like both of them.
Yeah.
And I lived up in Northern California, and we always looked down our noses at Southern California. We went to the city. This is when there weren't so many people up there, and before Silicon Valley, before all the growth. And people dressed up to go to the city. Mm-hmm. And our thought of Southern California were overweight women with their hair up and, going to the supermarket and coiled up and all this sort of stuff. And Los Angeles was smoggy.